Hello and welcome to CB Talk, the Combined Transport Blackwell monthly podcast. Today is June 20th, 2025, and I'm your host, Nick Card, Vice President of Operations. Today we've got a great interview for you with Rosa Learn. She's going to talk about permits, about weights and dimensions, about the challenges of getting heavy stuff moved around the country. But before we get to the interview, first, the news. Our drivers and employees of the month this month: Sophia Dufresne in Glass and Flatbed, Jeff Zidell in Blackwell, and Cecil Patrick in Heavy Haul. Congratulations and thank you for your hard work. In the office, Kevin Kaufman is the employee of the month. Thanks, Kevin. Kevin has been working on rolling out a new phone system for us. Warts and all, it's been a change for us to go from a legacy in-office system to a more modern cloud system, and Kevin has basically done that migration single-handedly. So thank you, Kevin, for all of your incredible work on that project. Our safety topic of the month is distracted driving. Remember to put the phone away, avoid eating, and limit those in-cab distractions. Stay focused on the road and stay safe. It's amazing how many accidents happen because something goes wrong in the cab and a driver leans over or looks over, and just those few seconds of eyes off the road are the difference between safety and disaster. Stay focused out there, avoid distracted driving. In the news this month, Trump cancels California's electric vehicle mandates. This move also blocks similar electric vehicle or zero-emission vehicle mandates in 11 other states. Industry groups have been in favor of this repeal. In particular, in trucking, we've seen the challenges. These electric vehicle mandates have basically no bearing in reality. Charging infrastructure doesn't exist, range doesn't exist, capacity doesn't exist, but these states have been pushing forward with this anyway. Now, obviously, California and other states are filing lawsuits challenging the decision, and so we'll see where that goes, but exciting moves in California and at the White House as far as these mandates are concerned. And now to our interview. My guest today is Rosa Learn with Permits. You've been with combined 18 years now, is that right?
In December, it'll be 18 years.
In December, it'll be 18 years. Wow. So you are Permit Department Supervisor, and you've been doing permits the whole time, right?
The entire time.
Wow.
Yeah, back then, in the old days, that's where you started, and that's where you stayed unless you wanted to move.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So I have to share this because I think this is really interesting. I learned a very interesting fact about you today. You were born in France. Is that correct?
Yep. I'm a military brat. My dad was in the military for 25 years, and so I was born in France, and I have 4 other brothers born everywhere.
So you traveled all around because of the military service as a kid. So where else did you grow up in then?
Primarily from the time where I start to remember is Oklahoma. We lived there for 3 years, then went to Germany for 3 years, then California for 3 years. Then that's where my dad retired, and then up here to Oregon where he was born.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So interesting childhood. We may have to get into that more. That sounds really interesting. But I do want to hit on permits because obviously that's kind of the point of the conversation. You've been doing permits for 18 years. I'm sure you've seen a lot of changes in the permit department, some of the the different kinds of processes and that kind of stuff.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm sure you faced the, accusation of, you're just a bunch of paper pushers there in the permit department.
Oh, yeah.
And so walk us through a little bit about sort of what it is that you do in permits and sort of how that's changed over the years.
Yep. So actually, when I first started, John Card oversaw the department, and back in that day, you would actually have to call Oklahoma to order a permit, and anybody needing a permit would hop on the line and yell out to everybody else, and you would sit on the phone for up to an hour before you could order a permit, but that's the only way you got to do it. But nowadays they have it pretty much streamlined, and hopefully everybody will. Oregon was one of the last states to finally get in line where they're utilizing these programs for what they're built for. They have the bridge calculations already factored in there, and all the different restrictions for each of the areas where it affects our routing, so we can see what's going on, what we need to route around, all the bridge heights, and can self-issue permits right away with most states.
Okay. So is that only permits of like a certain size? Once you get
once you get
so
into
big?
super loads, then it has to still go through, well, depending on the state. Some of the states have really utilized their programs to where we can get most superload permits to self-issue, and then the ones that are extraordinary, like the height is extremely high, 16 to 17 feet high, or we're maxing out completely the weights, and they really have to get their engineers involved to make sure the bridges are all okay.
So you keep mentioning the states, and I think there's a common misconception in the world of trucking where, we have this one federal highway system and a set of standard weights, legal weights. Well, some permits are the same, right?
Yeah, no, not at all. You're talking about government, so you could be cruising right along, be perfectly fine, and then you get to a state where that state wants extra responsibilities to go along with the driver, like such as pilot cars, because of your length or because of your weight or because of your height, or you have to travel at that particular state like Maryland at night because of your weight, but then you're going into Pennsylvania, and Pennsylvania wants you traveling during the day. They don't want that sort of load traveling at night, so it's completely different depending on what state you're going into.
So it's not just like, hey, I've learned the weights. It's each individual state. And then I'm sure in Canada, do the different provinces each have their own rules too?
They do. Absolutely. And then what we consider as normal measurements are completely different in Canada. Where we measure our kingpin is different where they measure their kingpin. What they consider as overhang is completely different than what we consider as overhang. So it just depends on what you're going and what those requirements are.
It's a lot of different rules to know and manage. And and then, of course, that must set, like, as you guys are trying to pick routes, well, obviously there's a lot of different ways to get from point A to point B, depending on which, where those are. And so then it's not just how do you get from point A to point B, but which states do you go through? What are their different rules? And then, well, if you want to go through this state that's really easy, that would mean you'd have to go through this state that's really hard.
Right, exactly. Wow. Yeah. And then we have to take, what we get is the dispatch sheet from the dispatcher, and that's how they quoted the load to get from origin to destination. And then we take that information based on what we know the current restrictions are, or how the driver weighs out on his load. He might not necessarily be able to go the way the dispatcher wants him to go because he can't axle out on the weights, or there's construction restriction in the way. So what they give us, then we make it make sense in order to be able to get the load there.
So you're dealing with theoretical weights and measurements, obviously, from the customer, but then where the rubber meets the road is actually the weights and dimensions on the truck itself.
Oh yeah. My favorite saying to all incoming new drivers is, we're only as good as the information we're given, and that goes from permits to also dispatch. Dispatch gets their information from the customer, and if the customer isn't giving accurate information to the dispatcher, they can't give it back to us so that we're able to do it. So the driver shows up and there's, the load is heavier or bigger or wider, and, that's outside of our hands, and then we start all over again.
Yeah. So then you have ordered permits, you're ready to roll, and throw them out the window.
That's
and
right.
Start again.
Welcome to heavy haul.
Well, you had mentioned earlier. You'd mentioned sort of the escorts and the other process that goes around that. So that's all within your department as well to deal with sourcing escorts. How does that work? We do.
So right now, I'm looking for pilot cars for Kansas, and I was looking for pilot cars on Kansas when I left, and I'm making 31 phone calls. I need front and rear cars. It just depends on where you're going, and not just that. You have to make sure that the pilot car has the correct certifications different states require different certifications. And if you pick up a car in Florida, Florida requires their own certification. Louisiana requires their own set of requirements to go through Louisiana. Same with New Mexico, same with Kansas. You have to make sure that that driver has what they need. In New Mexico, the driver will get a ticket along with the pilot car for not having the correct certifications. So,
jeez,
yeah,
wow, I
it's
guess
a lot.
It is a lot,
And it's not just pilot cars; it's police, it's hiring bucket trucks. It's a whole lot that goes into it.
Yeah. Is that a common thing to have to work with the police on these?
Yeah, most of my loads, that's what I'm doing is setting up police and bucket trucks and route surveys, and it's super loads.
Wow. So what? So you've used that term super loads. What kind of is a general descriptor of a super load? Like what sort of weights and measurements?
Yeah, well, you take what the state says as a general permittable load. If you're anything outside of what their generalization is, then that's that state's determination for a super load. So it could be East Coast, which I tell everybody was built for short, light people. So that, like Maryland, anything over 130,000 pounds in the state of Maryland, now they consider that a super load. If you come to Oregon, anything over 16 feet high or over 58,000 pounds on a triple, now you're considered a super load. It just depends on the state. Or over 200,000 pounds in the state of Washington is a super load, but Maryland is 130. It just depends on where you are and what their determinations are.
So you could be rolling along and 5 out of 6 states you're traveling through are easy self-issue permits, and one of those states you're a super load, and
That's
you
right.
have to
Yeah.
do you described the Oklahoma wait on the phone, and
Washington is 30 days, and we have 4 loads now going to Washington that are considered super loads.
30 days to get a permit?
Yeah, you could if they want to. Yeah.
Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah, and then some states, once you get into that super load status, they might require extra things on top of it, which is also on us. Like Montana and Idaho require what's called a traffic control plan. So we take the route that we're going to be using, and because the state says you're extra wide or you're extra big, we want you to write up a traffic control plan indicating any pullover spots to allow traffic to be able to get by the load to not have a big traffic buildup with commuter traffic. And it just, it can be really complex.
Wow. So how often do these rules change? Are you
all the time?
All the time. Every year there's new updates.
Yeah. Because again, you're talking with government. I've been to a lot of conferences where they talk about unity between the government, and we have like WASHTO and ASHTO, and it depends on where the district cutoffs are or whatever with those, but you just can't get the states to agree with each other on what they want to say as a standard utilization between, East Coast and West Coast. That escorts are required when you're over 100 feet long, then, Maryland says, no, we absolutely want it over 85 feet. So it just, it's crazy.
Yeah, everybody's like, it'd be great if everyone had the same rules. My rules.
Yeah, that's right. My rules.
Exactly. So, well, I want to go back to the driver, because I think that's a really interesting part of the permitting process. I mean, because from a driver's perspective, there's a lot of liability, I understand, with permits and being en route, and there's a lot of teamwork that happens there. Walk us through the perspective from a driver. They show up, they've got the dispatch, they show up for the load, and what happens for them?
So when they show up for the load and they get the measurements on the trailer, and they should always double check their height, not take the what dispatch says as the height of the load, add it to what they know their deck height is, because sometimes the information is not accurate and then the overall height is not accurate. They need to physically get out and make sure that they measure so that what they're sending us, that we're getting them a route that actually works with their load. And as soon as they can get to somewhere where they can get actual weights, they need to send that back to us also. They might have a load that's supposed to be considered legal weight, and they don't think that they need any weight on their load, and then they find out they're actually under gross but over axle. Now you have an overweight load. So they always need to double check both of those no matter what, because again, we're only as good as the information we're given.
Wow. So, and that axle, it would be like basically the load where it sits on the trailer. Is that why the axle might be too heavy?
Yeah.
And so you'd have to have a permit for that?
The states will single axle weigh you. And single axle, you can only have 17. So they might be, only 76,000 pounds overall on their weight ticket, but then they have one single axle that's 18,000. That's an overweight permit.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so then that's all. So for a driver, that's an important piece for them when they're running an overdimensional load, is to get weights and measures.
Yeah, and pre-planning. They need to make sure that they're looking at their permits and fully understanding what their routes are, instead of, going en route and then finding out that, hey, I don't really quite get this part, and then never assume anything, never try to Google it. Make sure you're calling us and getting us on the phone, because we can find you exactly where you're at and make sure that you fully understand what it is the state wants you to do. We can click on that permit, click on route, and it pulls up the driver's route. Then I can blow that route up exactly where the confusing part starts, and I can see exactly what it is the driver's supposed to do.
Sure. What are the consequences for being out of route from a driver's perspective?
Well, it depends on who catches you. If it's DOT, the consequences are huge, because the driver will get their permit pulled, and then they'll get fined for every 1,000 pounds over legal that they are, or traveling without a permit because they pulled your permit. Now technically you don't have a permit. Or if they get into an accident and little Susie's on her way to school talking on her cell phone and not paying attention, and then smashes into them, and they're in an area that's not on their permitted route, they're automatically found at fault. It's just a lot that could potentially happen.
Wow. Yeah, that is a significant concern.
Yeah. Or if they missed their turn and pulled over and kind of hopped on Google and said, all I got to do is get off here and then wrap back around, and then I'm back on route, but they got a tall load, and now they're sitting at a bridge they can't get under, so they were, in a pickle to begin with. Now they're in a worse one.
Yeah.
So we want to make sure that we keep them as compliant and safe as possible.
Yeah. Wow. So, that obviously, that goes to, something we've talked a lot about with other guests here is trip planning and being prepared, knowing your route, knowing where you're going. To be an overdimensional driver, that sounds like that's a lot more
it's a
stress.
lot on them. It is, yeah. And sometimes it is what it is. Like state of Texas, we always use them as an example. They got so much, the state is huge, they got so much going on that, we're human, people make mistakes, so they might miss putting a restriction on the route somewhere, and the driver was supposed to get off at this exit, but this exit is completely blocked off, and now what do I do? It just sometimes is what it is, and it's no fault of the driver at all.
But that's where you have to know what you're supposed to do, so then if things go wrong, you can stop and get things fixed.
Yeah, and they've had situations where there's an accident, and they got a police officer there trying to direct our oversized drivers to go on a detour out a route to get around the accident. But, DOT holds jurisdiction over that because they know what the driver can or can't do, but sometimes the driver's forced to do it because the officer is telling them to do it, and then we just kind of deal with it as we go.
Sure. Thinking about sort of that process for drivers, what are some of the biggest mistakes that you see around permits that, that drivers should be avoidable mistakes, I guess I'd say that?
Assuming that the dimensions of the load are accurate and adding it to the deck height, and assuming that the width is accurate and not actually getting out and measuring the width of the load. once it's on their trailer and once they receive those permits, they're saying, hey, I agree with everything. They just need to make sure that what you're agreeing to is accurate.
So that they're trying to shortcut and say,
Yeah.
well, I know
They
what the
get in a
dimensions
hurry.
are.
They got, they got to be somewhere at a certain time, and I get it. We're under the same pressures.
Sure. Yeah. There's one thing trucking is famous for is get there and get there now.
Yeah,
so.
yeah. We got our customers pushing us, and we're pushing, and it's a fast-paced business.
So for drivers that have no experience working with permits and stuff, I've heard, some confusion between, dispatch and permits, but permits are telling me a route. I mean, isn't that kind of dispatch? And help us, help clarify that difference.
Yeah.
What is permits versus dispatch, especially as it comes to like your loads and the super loads you were talking about too?
Yeah. Well, I mean, when we get the load from the dispatcher, they've spoken to the customer and they came to an agreement on what this is going to cost. And that's why we take the routes we take, because that was the negotiated rate. That's the way they want to go. And sometimes that does change because of the restrictions that are currently going on. And we have to do that. We're communicating it to the dispatcher. And if it's something they can go back on the customer for, they will. But I mean, it just is what it is sometimes. I hate saying that, but there's just no other way of saying it.
Sure. Yeah. So from a driver's perspective, like they've got their fleet manager, but they've also got a permit tech. How does that, how is that distinction for the driver? Is it you guys are only worried about weights and measures, or sort of walk us through that?
No, we're worrying about everything. When do you want your permits to start? We're looking at when the driver's getting there and getting loaded. We try to be 500 miles ahead of them. When they get there, they can load and go. So we're taking the dimensions and extending it out, or the weights and maxing it out, as long as it's not affecting the driver, putting him around too many restrictions, or causing him to have pilot cars that he doesn't need if we don't do it. And then we're looking at the delivery date, when the customer expects it by, and then we have to know, when does that driver want us to start the next set of permits, and which states are going to take longer to get. Who doesn't self-issue permits? South Carolina. They're really slow. So then we have to make sure we're submitting for everything in time for the driver to keep going and not shutting them down.
How long can it take? You mentioned South Carolina. Yeah. Is that a worst example?
Oh yeah, they could take anywhere from 24 to 36 hours to release a permit. California is another one. They're notoriously slow.
So if you're at 36 hours, that means if you have a modification and you're loading,
you're starting
there's
over.
2 days that you just lost.
And wasted, yeah.
So, wow.
Because of the state, yeah.
Does that happen very often?
Oh, yeah. More often than we would like it to happen. It's just outside of our hands once it goes to the state. And then especially if there's a change in the permit, then we have to withdraw it and start over again.
How often does that happen? I mean, because I know a lot of the loads we have, they're like farm equipment or tractors and stuff that are, they've been in the wild, so to speak. They've been modified. They've been, dinged up. And so we get these things that are like the spec of a tractor, but then it doesn't match. And how often does that kind of thing happen?
Not a whole lot. I would say the dispatchers are pretty much on top of it. So maybe like 20% of the time, which is a lot because we do a lot. But I mean, out of that 20% of the time, then you can take that down even further, because most of the states will allow us to amend a permit. So we can call them on the phone, and then they'll change whatever they want us to change on it, and then recalculate the route to make sure it works, and then we're all good. But then you got South Carolina, states like that, where it doesn't work.
Yeah, and then you're at their timeline.
Starting over, yep.
Wow, that's difficult. One of the things we talked about in the beginning was the sort of the move towards more computerization and more self-issue permits that you can just log on to a portal. Do you see that happening with the rest of the states? Do you think everybody's going to get on board and that's going to speed up?
I mean, you can't not continue with progress. Everybody is moving in that direction, and it makes it easier on the transportation company when you don't have so many hands involved in what you're doing. Like California hasn't completely opened it up to everybody. California is kind of a worse example because they haven't, most states care about whatever that state's jurisdiction lies in, which are U.S. highways, interstates, state routes, anything pertaining to the states. County and city are governed by the county and city. So not only do we do state permits, we have to do the city and county permits, except California. Portions of state routes in California have been relinquished to the counties. So you don't know, am I just supposed to get a state permit, or do I need to get county permits for the state route that I'm on? And yes, you do. Kern County says that anything traveling within that their portion of Kern County, you have to have it on their permit, whether you're on any county road or not. You have to have a county permit. So we use a permitting agent out of California just to do that. But once they can simplify things, then the transportation company can make their job easier, so you're not having to try to figure out all these different cogs of this machine to make it work.
Yeah. Wow. It's amazing the complexity of that.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Rosa, you're the permit queen for the day. You get to do whatever it is that you want. What is the one thing you would want to change about permitting to help make it easier, to make it smoother?
Get the states to agree on some sort of unity where pilot cars are required. I mean, I was just telling you at the very beginning, 31 phone calls. It shouldn't have to be like that. I get they want to make sure that everybody's safe. That's what we want, to make sure everybody's safe, but some of these things are completely ridiculous.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we have examples. We know from other states what the, if you didn't have an escort in this situation, we can look to a state and see, is it really unsafe to do that? I mean, I agree with you. I think government's great at getting in its own way about that sort of stuff, for sure. Well, awesome. Well, Rosa, is there anything else do we want to talk about permits?
Not really. I just want to say that I've appreciated everything that I've learned, and a lot of what I've learned are from our drivers. When I came into the position, I came in knowing nothing about permits. I was directionally challenged for sure. Northwest, east, south didn't even come into my vocabulary, but everything I've learned was from John Card, Jason Card, and the drivers. So I've learned a lot, and I appreciate them very much.
Yeah, awesome. I remember John showed me his old Texas permit book, that giant atlas he used to keep on his desk to manually issue Texas permits.
We would have to give a form. John created a form because the only person who could do a Texas permit was John. Now we can bust him out all day long by ourselves. So he had a form he would fill out, and we would give it to him. And if we forgot to put something on the permit, he would come the request, he would come put it on our desk and say reject. So as a joke, on his birthday one year, I got him a stamp that said reject on it. But that was the olden days. Now we don't worry about that anymore.
Yeah. Man, times have changed.
Oh, yeah.
Well, Rosa, thank you so much for talking with us today. It's been great. Thanks for 18 years, man. That's crazy.
For sure. I'll retire here if
so like, what is that, 18 more years? Is that
I don't know about that.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Rosa. It's been a great conversation with you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rosa, for the interview. It was really great hearing about the size and weights, and I had no idea the different challenges with each individual state. Really good stuff there. Our next episode will be out on July 25th. Our guest will be Jana Jarvis, president of the Oregon Trucking Association, our first outside guest. Jana is going to be talking to us about the Oregon legislative session, which is currently wrapping up right now. The House and Senate are discussing a transportation package. We should have some updates on that, as well as some more information on the federal legislation and the rules coming out of the White House. So if you have any questions for Jana, please send them to us via Facebook or email them to us at cbtalk@combinedtransport.com. We appreciate your participation. It's your engagement that makes this podcast work. Thank you for your time. Thank you for listening. And thank you for being part of the Combined Transport team.